Dr. Sarah Mitchell dropped her binoculars, the metal clattering against the rocky ground as she stared at the magnificent stallion lying motionless in Red Rock Canyon. The Mahogany Bay Mustang hadn't moved in 18 hours, his powerful frame curved protectively around something they couldn't see. It wasn't an injured horse seeking shelter. It was a guardian refusing to abandon his post. Jake Thompson stumbled backward, his weathered hands trembling as the telephoto lens revealed what lay beneath the stallion's massive body. Emma Davis gasped, her medical kit scattering across the desert floor. Sarah's mind flashed to the missing persons reports she'd reviewed that morning, all empty, all hopeless. Now this wild creature had accomplished what an entire system had failed to do. "Get Flight for Life on the radio now," Sarah commanded, her voice cracking despite 20 years of emergency calls. What had driven a wild Mustang to risk everything for a human child? And how long did they have before it was too late for both of them? Leave a like and share your thoughts in the comments, along with the city you're watching. From now, let's continue with the story. The call had come into Nevada Wild Heart Rescue at 6:30 that crisp October morning, just as the desert sun painted Red Rock Canyon in shades of amber and gold. A hiker had spotted what appeared to be a dead or dying Mustang stallion 30 miles outside Las Vegas, motionless for nearly a day while buzzards circled overhead like harbingers of death. Dr. Sarah Mitchell, lead veterinarian for the rescue organization, was a woman who had learned to read tragedy in the tilt of an animal's head, the droop of wings, the stillness that meant surrender. At 45, her petite frame carried the weight of 2 decades spent pulling creatures back from the edge of extinction. Her dark hair, always pulled into a practical ponytail, had started showing silver threads after losing her own child to miscarriage 10 years ago. That loss had forged her determination to save every lost cause that crossed her path. She assembled her team quickly, knowing that with desert animals, every hour could mean the difference between rescue and recovery of remains. Jake Thompson, her large animal specialist, loaded the mobile veterinary unit with practiced efficiency. At 35, Jake carried the weathered hands and sun-lined face of someone who'd grown up on Nevada ranches, understanding horses with an intuition that bordered on telepathic. His family had raised Mustangs for 3 generations before economic hardship forced them to sell their herd to the Bureau of Land Management. Emma Davis, their young veterinary technician, double-checked the emergency medical supplies with the methodical care that had made her invaluable despite being fresh out of school. At 28, she possessed the rare gift of calming even the most traumatized animals with her gentle touch and soothing voice. Red Rock Canyon stretched before them like a moonscape painted in rust and gold, its sandstone formations sculpted by millennia of wind and water into impossible arches and towers. This was harsh country, where wild Mustangs had roamed for generations, descendants of Spanish horses that had learned to survive on scattered water sources and sparse desert vegetation. The terrain was treacherous, littered with hidden crevices and loose stone that could easily cripple an unwary horse. As their rescue vehicle bounced along the rough access road, Sarah felt the familiar knot of anxiety tightening in her chest. In 20 years of wildlife rescue, she had learned to prepare herself for heartbreak as much as hope. The first glimpse of the stallion took Sarah's breath away. Even lying down in what appeared to be distress, the horse was magnificent beyond description. His coat gleamed like burnished mahogany in the morning sunlight, each muscle clearly defined beneath the glossy surface. His black mane spread across the rocky ground like spilled ink, and a perfect white star marked his broad forehead. He was massive, easily 16 hands and probably weighing close to 1,200 pounds of pure power. But something was profoundly wrong with the scene before them. The stallion lay in an unusual position, His powerful body curved protectively around something they couldn't quite see from their vantage point 50 yards away. His great head was raised and alert, dark eyes tracking their every movement with an intensity that spoke of fierce determination rather than the glazed weakness of injury or illness. "That's not the posture of a dying horse," Jake observed quietly as they unloaded their equipment, his voice carrying the authority of someone who had worked with horses his entire life. "He's guarding something." Sarah raised her binoculars, studying the stallion's behavior with growing confusion. Every few minutes the magnificent animal would lower his head toward the ground beneath him, making soft, gentle sounds that were completely at odds with his aggressive surveillance of their approach. His breathing was labored, and she could clearly see what appeared to be dried blood matting the hair on his left shoulder. But his eyes remained bright and focused with laser-like precision. Emma unpacked the tranquilizer gun with practiced efficiency, but Sarah held up a restraining hand. "Wait, let's observe for a few minutes. Something about this doesn't add up." As they watched from their safe distance, the stallion's behavior became even more puzzling and extraordinary. When a curious raven landed nearby, attracted by the scent of blood, the horse's reaction was immediate and startling. He pinned his ears flat against his skull and let out a warning neigh so fierce and protective that the bird immediately took flight, squawking in alarm. Whatever he was protecting beneath his massive frame, he was clearly prepared to defend it with his life. "I've never seen behavior like this in 20 years, Sarah said softly, her scientific mind racing through possibilities. "He's injured. You can see the blood in the way he's favoring his left side. But he won't move. Wild horses flee when they're hurt. They don't stay in one place and guard territory like this." Jake adjusted his field glasses, trying to get a clearer view of whatever lay beneath the stallion's protective bulk. "There's definitely something under him. I can see glimpses of... I'm not sure what it is. It's small, and I swear it's moving." Sarah felt her heart rate increase as the implications began to sink in. In 2 decades of wildlife rescue, she had seen horses protect their own foals with fierce devotion, but this stallion's posture suggested he was guarding something much smaller than a horse. The way his massive body was positioned created a perfect shelter from the elements, like a living fortress protecting whatever precious cargo lay within his protective embrace. "We need to get closer," Sarah decided, her voice tight with growing urgency. "But very carefully. If he's injured and protecting something, he's going to see us as a mortal threat." As the rescue team began their cautious approach, moving with the slow deliberation of people who understood they were dealing with a wild animal capable of killing them with a single kick, the stallion's defensive posture intensified dramatically. His ears remained pinned back against his head, and his powerful muscles tensed beneath the mahogany coat. Despite his obvious injury and the blood loss that should have weakened him, there was nothing helpless about his demeanor. This was a warrior prepared for battle, and his message was crystal clear. He would not be moved, and he would not allow anyone to harm whatever lay beneath him. Sarah approached first, moving with the careful precision of someone who had spent decades reading animal behavior and understanding the fine line between caution and confidence. She spoke in the soft, soothing tones she had perfected over years of working with frightened and traumatized animals. "Easy, beautiful boy," she murmured, her voice barely audible over the desert wind. "We're here to help you. We can see you're hurt, and we want to help." The stallion's response was to shift his position slightly, somehow managing to conceal even more completely whatever lay beneath him. The movement caused him to wince, visibly in pain, and fresh blood appeared along the edges of his shoulder wound, but he didn't back down even an inch. "Dr. Mitchell," Emma whispered urgently from behind her. "Look at his left foreleg." Sarah focused her attention on the stallion's leg and felt her stomach drop with the realization of how serious his condition truly was. The injury was far worse than they had initially assessed from a distance. Deep lacerations ran along his shoulder and upper leg, suggesting he had fallen or been caught on something with sharp edges, perhaps barbed wire or jagged rock. The wounds were at least a day old based on the dried blood and early signs of infection beginning to set in around the edges. "He needs immediate medical attention," Jake said quietly, his professional assessment cutting through the emotional impact of the scene. "Those wounds are serious. If infection sets in fully, we could lose him." But the stallion seemed completely oblivious to his own peril, his entire being focused on protecting whatever lay beneath his massive body. Every few minutes he would lower his head and make those same soft, gentle sounds that were so completely at odds with his fierce, defensive display toward the humans. The contrast was both heartbreaking and mystifying. Sarah made a decision that went against every protocol in her rescue manual. But her instincts told her this situation required extraordinary measures. "I'm going to try to get close enough to see what he's protecting. If we can understand what's driving this behavior, maybe we can find a way to help both him and whatever he's guarding." "Sarah, that's dangerous," Jake protested, moving closer with obvious concern. "He's a wild stallion in pain and defensive mode. If he feels cornered, he could strike out without warning." "I understand the risks," Sarah replied, already moving forward with careful determination. "But look at him, Jake. This isn't random behavior driven by pain or confusion. This is purposeful, intelligent protection. He's badly hurt. But he's choosing to stay here and suffer rather than seek safety for himself. That tells me whatever he's protecting is worth risking his life for." Sarah approached to within 10 feet of the stallion before he issued his final, unmistakable warning. The great horse reared up slightly on his hind legs, his front hooves pawing the air in a display of raw power that would have been terrifying if not for the obvious pain it caused him. But in that heart-stopping moment, as the stallion lifted his front end in warning, Sarah caught her first clear glimpse of what lay beneath him. Her breath caught in her throat, and she immediately froze in place. "Oh my God," she whispered, the words barely audible. "What is it?" Emma called from behind her, tension crackling in her voice. Sarah couldn't immediately answer. What she had seen defied everything she knew about wild horse behavior and challenged the very foundations of her understanding of animal instincts. Huddled beneath the stallion's protective bulk was not a foal, not another horse, but something that should have been impossible in this remote canyon. "Jake, bring the telephoto camera," Sarah said urgently, her voice shaking with disbelief. "We need to document this immediately. No one is going to believe it otherwise." The stallion settled back down, once again concealing his precious cargo beneath his massive frame. But Sarah had seen enough to turn her world upside down. Her mind raced as she tried to process the implications of what she had witnessed, the sheer impossibility of the situation unfolding before them. "Sarah, what did you see?" Jake pressed, moving up beside her with the camera, his own voice tight with growing concern. "A baby," Sarah said softly, the words falling like stones into the desert silence. "But not a horse baby. Jake, there's a human infant under that stallion." The words hung in the air like a thunderclap that seemed to echo off the canyon walls. Emma gasped audibly, her hand flying to cover her mouth, and Jake nearly dropped the expensive camera equipment. The magnitude of what Sarah had just said hit them all like a physical blow. "That's impossible," Jake said automatically, even as he raised the camera to capture photographic evidence. "How would a wild Mustang? Why would he—" But even as he spoke, the evidence was right there in front of them, undeniable and extraordinary. The stallion's behavior suddenly made perfect, heartbreaking sense. He wasn't protecting territory or a food source or even another member of his species. He was protecting a helpless human child, and he was clearly prepared to die rather than abandon his self-appointed charge. Sarah felt tears sting her eyes as the full magnitude of the situation crashed over her like a wave. Somewhere, probably not far from this very spot, a family was desperately searching for their missing baby. Parents were living through every parent's worst nightmare, not knowing if their child was alive or dead. And here, in this remote desert canyon, a wild horse had found that child and made a decision that transcended species, instinct, and even basic self-preservation. Jake managed to get several photographs with the telephoto lens, capturing images that would later become evidence in one of Nevada's most baffling and heartwarming cases. The photograph on the camera's LCD screen showed what Sarah had glimpsed earlier, a small bundle wrapped in what appeared to be a pink blanket tucked safely beneath the stallion's protective bulk. "The blanket looks relatively clean," Sarah observed, studying the digital image with growing amazement. "And look at the way the stallion is positioned. He's been keeping rain and cold off the baby. See how his body creates a perfect windbreak? This isn't accidental positioning. This is intelligent, purposeful protection." The baby appeared to be moving in the photograph, which meant she was alive. But after potentially days in the wilderness, her condition was completely unknown. Every moment of delay could be critical, but approaching too aggressively could trigger the stallion to panic and accidentally harm the very child he was trying to protect. Emma was already on her satellite phone, her voice shaking as she spoke to the emergency dispatcher. "This is going to sound impossible, but we have a wild Mustang stallion who appears to be protecting a human infant in Red Rock Canyon. We need Flight for Life, Child Protective Services, and probably the Sheriff's Department immediately." The stallion seemed to sense their increased urgency and activity. His ears swiveled constantly between the rescue team and the growing sound of approaching helicopter rotors in the distance. When the Flight for Life helicopter finally appeared over the canyon rim, his reaction was immediate and dramatic. The great horse struggled to his feet despite his injured leg threatening to buckle beneath his weight. His determination was unwavering as he stood protectively over the baby, his massive frame serving as a shield against the powerful downwash from the helicopter's rotors. The effort clearly caused him agony. Fresh blood seeped from his shoulder wound and his breathing became even more labored, but he remained upright and defiant, even in the face of this mechanical monster descending from the sky. "He's magnificent," Emma breathed, watching the stallion's brave stand with obvious admiration and heartbreak. "He doesn't understand what the helicopter is, but he knows it's a potential threat to the baby. Look at him. He's terrified, but he won't back down." Sarah felt a surge of profound admiration for the wild horse's courage, but she also knew they were rapidly running out of time. The stallion's condition was clearly deteriorating with each passing minute, and every moment of delay put both him and the infant at increasingly greater risk. The helicopter landed in a clear area about 100 yards away from the stallion, and the medical team quickly unloaded their equipment. Dr. James Mitchell, the emergency physician leading the flight crew, approached Sarah with barely concealed skepticism written across his weathered features. "Your dispatch said something about a horse guarding a baby?" Dr. Mitchell asked, his tone suggesting he thought someone had made a serious error in communication. "I have to tell you that sounds completely impossible." "I know exactly how it sounds," Sarah interrupted, understanding his disbelief completely. "But look for yourself, Doctor." Mitchell raised his binoculars and studied the scene unfolding before them. Sarah watched his expression change from skepticism to amazement to urgent medical concern as the reality of the situation became undeniable. "Dear God," he said quietly, lowering the binoculars with shaking hands. "There really is a child under there. How long has this been going on?" "We don't know for certain," Sarah admitted, the weight of uncertainty heavy in her voice. "The stallion has been here at least 18 hours, but possibly much longer." The baby could be severely dehydrated, hypothermic, or worse. We simply don't know what condition she's in. We need to get to that child immediately, Dr. Mitchell said, his medical training taking over as he assessed the emergency. Every minute could be critical. But Sarah caught his arm before he could move toward the stallion. Doctor, that stallion is wild, injured, and protecting what he clearly perceives as his responsibility. If you approach too quickly or aggressively, he could panic and accidentally harm the baby, or he could attack to defend her. We have to be extremely careful about how we handle this. The standoff continued for several tense minutes as more personnel arrived on the scene. Sheriff's deputies, Child Protective Services workers, and additional veterinary staff created a growing circle around the unlikely pair. But the stallion remained unmoved, both literally and figuratively, standing his ground with the determination of a creature who had found his purpose. It was Jake who first noticed the critical change in the stallion's condition. "Sarah, look at his breathing," he said urgently. The stallion's sides were heaving more laboriously than before, and his great head was beginning to droop despite his obvious efforts to remain alert and vigilant. The combination of significant blood loss, extreme stress, and the physical effort required to maintain his protective stance was clearly taking a devastating toll on his already compromised system. "He's going into shock," Sarah said with growing alarm. "We're going to lose him if we don't act soon, and if he collapses—" She didn't need to finish the sentence. Everyone present understood the horrifying implication. If the massive stallion collapsed on top of the baby, the very act of protection that had saved her life could become the cause of her death. Sarah made a decision that would either save 2 lives or end her career in disgrace. "I'm going in," she announced, her voice carrying the steel determination that had seen her through 2 decades of impossible rescues. "Emma, prepare the tranquilizer gun, but only as an absolute last resort. Jake, be ready with emergency medical treatment the moment I can get close enough to assess both patients." As Sarah began her approach toward what would become the most dangerous and emotionally charged rescue of her career, she moved with the careful precision of someone who had spent her entire adult life reading the subtle language of frightened animals. Every step was deliberate, every gesture designed to communicate peaceful intentions to a creature operating on pure protective instinct. The stallion watched her approach with eyes that held both bone-deep weariness and what could only be described as desperate hope. His magnificent head swayed slightly with exhaustion, but his gaze never wavered from her face. "Easy, beautiful boy," Sarah murmured, her voice barely audible over the desert wind that carried the scent of sage and dust. "I know you're protecting something precious. I'm here to help, not to hurt." When she reached a distance of about 15 feet, the stallion issued another warning, a low, rumbling sound that seemed to emerge from deep within his massive chest. But this time, Sarah noticed something that made her heart skip a beat. Between his warning calls directed at her, he made completely different sounds aimed downward toward whatever lay beneath him. These were soft, gentle, reassuring, nickering sounds that spoke of tenderness and care. "He's talking to the baby," Sarah realized with growing amazement, her voice filled with wonder. "He's reassuring her that everything is going to be okay." Dr. Mitchell, watching the extraordinary scene unfold through binoculars from the medical staging area, spoke into his radio with professional awe coloring his usually clinical tone. "The horse appears to be exhibiting genuine protective parental behavior toward the infant. This is completely unprecedented in my experience." Sarah continued her painstakingly slow approach, and when she reached a distance of about 10 feet from the stallion, she made a calculated decision that went against every piece of training she had ever received. She knelt down on the rocky ground, making herself smaller and less threatening. The gesture had an immediate and profound effect on the situation. The stallion's ears came forward slightly for the first time since they had arrived, and his aggressively defensive posture relaxed just enough to suggest he was beginning to see her as something other than a mortal threat. "That's it," Sarah said softly, her voice filled with gentle encouragement. "You know I'm not here to hurt your baby, don't you? You can sense that I want to help." The word baby seemed to have an almost magical calming effect on the great horse. His labored breathing slowed slightly, and he lowered his massive head to check on his precious charge. In that moment of vulnerability, Sarah caught her clearest and most detailed view yet of what lay beneath his protective bulk. The infant appeared to be approximately 6 months old, wrapped in a pink blanket that was dirty and stained, but had clearly provided crucial warmth and protection. The baby was definitely moving, which confirmed she was alive, but Sarah could immediately see signs of dehydration and exposure that made her heart race with medical urgency. Dark hair peeked out from beneath the blanket, and she could just make out tiny fingers gripping the fabric with the instinctive hold that babies maintain even in distress. "Doctor?" "Mitchell," Sarah called quietly into her radio, her voice tight with professional concern. "The baby appears to be approximately 6 months old, conscious and responsive, but showing clear signs of dehydration and possible hypothermia. We need to move quickly, but we cannot rush this." Sarah continued to inch closer with glacial patience, talking constantly in the soothing tones that had calmed thousands of frightened animals over the years. "You've done such an incredible job protecting her," she told the stallion, her voice filled with genuine admiration and respect. "But she needs medical help that you can't provide, no matter how much you love her. Will you let us help you both?" When Sarah was just 5 feet away from the stallion, close enough to see the individual whiskers on his muzzle and the depth of exhaustion in his dark eyes, the magnificent horse made a decision that defied every expert prediction and professional assessment. Instead of attacking or fleeing as wild horses typically would when cornered, he slowly and carefully lowered himself part way to the ground, positioning himself so that Sarah could see the baby clearly while still maintaining his protective posture. Sarah's breath caught in her throat as she got her first completely unobstructed look at the infant who had become the center of this extraordinary drama. The baby was indeed a little girl, probably around 6 months old as she had estimated, with dark hair and large, serious eyes that seemed far too aware and intelligent for someone so young. She was wrapped in what had once been a clean pink blanket, now stained with dirt and dust, but still providing the crucial warmth that had likely saved her life during the cold desert nights. "Hello, sweetheart," Sarah whispered to the baby, her voice breaking with emotion. "We're going to get you out of here and make sure you're safe." The little girl's eyes fixed on Sarah's face with startling intensity, and to everyone's complete amazement she smiled. It was a weak smile, clearly reflecting her compromised physical condition, but it was unmistakably a smile of recognition and trust that seemed to acknowledge that help had finally arrived. The stallion watched this interaction between Sarah and the baby with laser-focused intensity, and Sarah could almost see him making some kind of complex assessment of the situation. After several long, tense moments during which the only sounds were the whisper of desert wind and the distant hum of helicopter rotors, he made those same soft, gentle sounds to the baby that Sarah had been hearing all morning. "He's telling her that I'm okay," Sarah realized with a mixture of scientific fascination and deep emotional impact. "He's giving his permission for me to approach her." This isn't just instinct, this is conscious decision-making. With infinite care and patience, Sarah reached out slowly toward the baby. The stallion's massive head remained close, his eyes tracking every movement Sarah made, but he didn't interfere or show any sign of aggression. His message was clear. He was allowing this, but he would be watching every second. When Sarah's fingers first made contact with the infant, she could immediately assess the child's condition through touch. The baby was warm. The stallion's body heat had successfully prevented hypothermia even during the cold desert nights, but she was clearly dehydrated and weak from what had probably been days without proper nutrition or medical care. Sarah could feel the tiny heart beating rapidly against the small chest as she carefully lifted the infant from her improvised nest beneath the stallion's protective body. The baby felt almost weightless in her arms, a fragile bundle of life that had survived against impossible odds thanks to the devotion of a wild horse who had appointed himself her guardian. "I've got her," Sarah called to the medical team, her voice filled with a mixture of relief and ongoing concern. "She's alive and responsive, but she definitely needs immediate medical attention." As Sarah stood with the baby cradled safely in her arms, the stallion struggled to rise as well. His injured leg nearly buckled under his weight, sending a fresh wave of blood down his shoulder, but his determination to continue protecting his charge kept him upright through sheer force of will. He followed Sarah step for step as she carried the infant toward the waiting medical team, never moving more than a few feet away from the child he had risked everything to save. "Doctor." Mitchell took the baby from Sarah's arms and immediately began his preliminary medical assessment while the rest of his team prepared emergency treatment protocols. "She's dehydrated and probably hasn't had proper nutrition in at least 12 to 18 hours, he reported quickly, "but her vital signs are actually stronger than I expected given the circumstances. This horse may very well have saved her life." As the medical team worked efficiently to stabilize the infant and prepare her for transport to the hospital, Sarah turned her full attention back to the stallion who had made this miracle possible. He was swaying dangerously on his feet now, his adrenaline finally beginning to fail as the immediate danger to his charge appeared to be passing. "Now it's your turn, brave boy," Sarah said gently, approaching him with her medical kit and the soft voice she reserved for her most critical patients. "You've done your job magnificently. Now let us do ours." Jake moved in to assist as Sarah began the delicate process of treating the stallion's wounds. The great horse was clearly exhausted beyond measure, but even as Sarah cleaned and examined his injuries, his eyes remained fixed on the medical team working over the baby. His ears tracked every sound, every movement, as if he needed to maintain his vigil even while receiving treatment himself. But even as Sarah worked to save the stallion's life and ensure the baby's continued recovery, the biggest questions of this extraordinary case remained completely unanswered. Who was this baby who had somehow ended up alone in one of Nevada's most remote and dangerous wilderness areas? How had she gotten here, and under what circumstances? And perhaps most mysteriously of all, how had a wild Mustang stallion become her unlikely guardian angel and savior? The answers to these questions would prove to be even more extraordinary and heartbreaking than the rescue itself, involving family secrets, wartime trauma, and a connection between horse and child that would challenge everything the scientific community thought they knew about animal behavior and interspecies relationships. As the helicopter prepared for departure with its precious cargo, Sarah couldn't shake the feeling that this was only the beginning of a story that would captivate not just Nevada, but the entire nation. As Dr. Mitchell and his team worked frantically to stabilize the baby in the helicopter, Sheriff Deputy Maria Santos began the investigation that would soon dominate headlines across the country and raise questions that challenged everything people thought they knew about family, loyalty, and love. The infant had no identification, no car seat, no diaper bag, nothing that might indicate how a 6-month-old child had ended up in one of Nevada's most remote and unforgiving wilderness areas. "Dr. Mitchell," Deputy Santos approached Sarah as she administered antibiotics to the stallion's infected wounds. The great horse stood quietly now, allowing her to treat his injuries with the same trust he had shown when permitting her to approach the baby. "We've checked missing persons reports for the past week. No reports of missing infants matching this child's description anywhere in Nevada, California, or Arizona. Sarah looked up from bandaging the stallion's shoulder wound, her hands steady despite the emotional earthquake of the morning's events. That doesn't make any sense whatsoever. A 6-month-old baby doesn't just materialize in the middle of nowhere. Someone has to be looking for her. There's something else that's troubling, Deputy Santos continued, her expression growing more grim by the moment. We found fresh tire tracks about a quarter-mile from here, near the old mining road that leads into the canyon. They're recent, probably no more than 48 hours old, and there are signs that someone stopped there deliberately, not because of mechanical problems. The implications hit Sarah like a physical blow to her chest. You think someone abandoned her here? Deliberately left a baby to die in the desert? It's looking increasingly likely, the deputy admitted, her voice tight with the kind of controlled anger that comes from years of investigating crimes against children. We've got teams searching the entire area for any other evidence, but so far the tire tracks and the baby are all we have to work with. Sarah felt a surge of rage so intense it made her hands shake as she considered the possibility that someone had deliberately left a helpless infant in one of the most dangerous environments imaginable. But as she looked at the stallion who was now allowing Emma to clean his wounds with patient acceptance, she was overwhelmed by gratitude for this unlikely guardian who had refused to let an innocent child die alone and afraid. The helicopter lifted off with the baby and medical team, heading for Las Vegas Children's Hospital 45 minutes away. Sarah watched it disappear over the canyon rim, then turned her complete attention to the stallion who had made the rescue possible. His condition was serious but not immediately life-threatening if they could prevent the infection from spreading further. His wounds are deep but clean, Emma reported as she worked. The main concern is preventing sepsis from setting in, but if we can get him stabilized and keep him calm, I think we can save him. If we can get him to the sanctuary, Jake added, joining the conversation with obvious concern. Sarah, he's a wild Mustang. Even if we heal his injuries completely, he belongs out here in the wilderness. We can't exactly load him into a trailer and transport him to a rescue facility like a domestic horse. Sarah looked at the stallion who was gazing at the sky where the helicopter had disappeared with his precious charge. There was something almost heartbroken in his expression, as if he understood that his job was finished but couldn't quite accept that the baby was truly gone from his protection. Maybe we can't take him to the ranch, Sarah said slowly, an idea beginning to form in her mind. But we can bring the ranch to him. Over the next several hours, Sarah's team established a temporary treatment station right there in the canyon. They brought in portable shelters, comprehensive medical supplies, and everything needed to monitor the stallion's recovery in his natural environment. It was an unprecedented field operation that violated numerous protocols, but Sarah was determined not to abandon the horse who had shown such extraordinary compassion and courage. The stallion seemed to understand instinctively that they were there to help rather than harm. He accepted treatment willingly, ate the high-nutrition feed they offered, and even allowed them to construct a temporary shelter to protect him from the desert sun. But his eyes constantly scanned the sky, as if hoping for the helicopter's return and the sound of the baby he had protected with his life. 3 days into the recovery process, Deputy Santos returned with news that would complete the disturbing picture of what had actually happened in Red Rock Canyon. Her expression was grim as she approached Sarah, who was checking the stallion's healing progress. "We found her," the deputy announced without preamble. The baby's mother, Amanda Thompson, 19 years old, from a small town outside Las Vegas. She was arrested at the Mexican border trying to cross with a fake ID. Sarah felt her heart sink with the confirmation of her worst fears. She abandoned her own child in the wilderness. "It's more complicated than that," Deputy Santos explained, her voice carrying the weariness of someone who had seen too much human tragedy. Amanda was involved with a man named Brad Morrison, a 25-year-old Afghanistan veteran with severe PTSD. According to Amanda's statement, Brad had been making increasingly erratic threats about people who would try to hurt the baby. Emma looked up from where she was preparing the stallion's evening medication. What kind of threats? The kind that come from a severely damaged mind, the deputy replied. Morrison apparently became convinced that leaving the baby in civilization would make her a target for terrorists, drug dealers, or other threats. He convinced Amanda that the only way to truly protect their daughter was to leave her somewhere completely isolated, where no one would ever think to look. Sarah shook her head in disbelief and horror. So he convinced a teenage mother to abandon her baby in one of the most dangerous places in Nevada and somehow made her believe it was for the child's protection? Amanda says Morrison told her he knew of a place where the baby would be found quickly by search and rescue teams, but not before they had established that she was untraceable to anyone who might want to harm her, Deputy Santos continued. She had no idea how remote this location actually was or how long it might be before anyone found the child. Jake stepped closer to the conversation, his face dark with anger. Where is Morrison now? That's the problem, the deputy admitted. He's disappeared completely. Amanda says he dropped her off at a bus station in Las Vegas 3 days ago and told her to start over somewhere safe. She hasn't heard from him since, and we have no idea where he might have gone. As the investigation deepened and the media attention intensified, Sarah found herself spending more and more time with the recovering stallion. The horse had become something of an international celebrity, with reporters and photographers maintaining a constant presence at the canyon, hoping for glimpses of the guardian angel Mustang who had captured hearts around the world. But Sarah was more interested in the quiet moments when she sat with the stallion and watched him continue to scan the horizon with patient hope. He had formed a bond with that baby that transcended every boundary that science thought existed between species. She wondered if he would ever truly understand that his remarkable job was finished. The answer to that question would come in the most unexpected and heartwarming way possible, but not before the investigation took several more dramatic turns that would reveal the true depth of Brad Morrison's psychological damage and the extraordinary lengths to which love, even misguided love, would drive someone to protect what they cherished most. 2 weeks after the rescue, Sarah received a phone call that would change everything once again and open the door to a reunion that seemed too incredible to be possible. 2 weeks after the rescue, Dr. Sarah Mitchell received a phone call from Las Vegas Children's Hospital that would prove to be the beginning of an unprecedented medical and emotional crisis. Dr. James Mitchell was on the line with news that seemed too incredible to be true, yet was documented by an entire pediatric team. Dr. Mitchell, I need to ask you something that's going to sound absolutely impossible, Dr. James began, his usually confident voice carrying an undertone of professional bewilderment. That baby, Lily Rose, we've identified her full name from Amanda Thompson's statement. She's been medically stable and physically thriving since the rescue. But there's something highly unusual happening that we cannot explain. Sarah felt her pulse quicken as she gripped the satellite phone tighter. She was standing beside the stallion's temporary shelter, watching him as he maintained his constant vigil, scanning the horizon for any sign of the helicopter's return. What kind of unusual behavior are you observing? She won't stop crying unless we play recordings of horse sounds, Dr. James explained, his medical training clearly struggling to process what he was reporting. We've tried everything conventional: music therapy, white noise machines, human voices, even recordings of heartbeats. But the only thing that calms her down completely is the sound of horses neighing, nickering, or breathing. The moment we stop the recordings, she becomes inconsolable again. Sarah looked across the canyon to where the stallion stood on a rocky outcrop, still watching the sky with the patience of a creature who had found his life's purpose. She bonded with him, Sarah said softly. the scientific implications beginning to cascade through her mind. In those hours or days they spent together, she learned to associate his sounds with safety, protection, and love. To her, he became her parent. "There's more," Dr. James continued, and Sarah could hear papers rustling in the background as he consulted his medical charts. "Child Protective Services has been working with Amanda Thompson, and the situation is far more complex than anyone initially realized. Amanda is enrolled in a court-mandated rehabilitation program, working desperately to get her life together so she can regain custody of her daughter, but Lily is struggling significantly in foster care. She's not developing at the rate she should be, and she's showing signs of what we can only describe as severe separation anxiety." Sarah felt an idea forming in her mind, an idea so unprecedented and medically unorthodox that she hesitated to voice it. But as she watched the stallion's unwavering devotion and considered Lily's obvious distress, she realized that conventional approaches might not be adequate for such an unconventional situation. "Dr. James, what would happen if Lily could somehow be reunited with the stallion, even temporarily, under strict medical supervision?" Sarah asked, knowing she was suggesting something that had never been attempted in modern medical history. There was a long pause on the other end of the line, and Sarah could almost hear the doctor's internal struggle between medical protocol and unprecedented circumstances. "Dr. Mitchell, that would be highly irregular and potentially dangerous. We're talking about bringing a vulnerable infant into direct contact with a wild animal, regardless of his previous protective behavior. A wild animal who has already proven he would die before allowing harm to come to her," Sarah pointed out, her voice carrying the conviction of someone who had witnessed the stallion's devotion firsthand. "Dr. James, what if this stallion isn't just Lily's rescuer? What if he's actually the key to her psychological and emotional recovery?" The conversation that followed involved hospital administrators, child protective services supervisors, veterinary experts, animal behaviorists, and eventually even a family court judge. The legal and medical precedents were completely non-existent, but the circumstances were so extraordinary that traditional rules and protocols seemed inadequate to address the situation. After 3 days of intense negotiations, legal consultations, and medical evaluations, an unprecedented decision was reached. Lily would be brought back to Red Rock Canyon for a carefully supervised reunion with the stallion under the strictest possible medical and veterinary supervision. Portable medical equipment would be standing by, and both Dr. James and Sarah would have full medical teams on standby. The day of the reunion, Sarah's hands trembled as she prepared the site with meticulous care. They had created a secure perimeter where the stallion could see and hear Lily while ensuring complete safety for everyone involved. Portable intensive care equipment stood ready, and both medical teams had rehearsed emergency protocols multiple times. When the helicopter landed and Dr. James emerged carrying Lily, the stallion's reaction was immediate, profound, and unmistakably joyful. The great horse lifted his magnificent head and called out with a sound that was part neigh, part song, and completely filled with recognition and love. The deep, resonant call echoed off the canyon walls like a celebration. Lily's response was equally dramatic and emotionally overwhelming. The baby, who had been fussing and crying during the helicopter ride, despite the medical team's best efforts, immediately stopped crying and began making soft cooing sounds. Her tiny arms reached toward the stallion as if she remembered exactly who he was and had been waiting for this moment. "This is absolutely incredible," Dr. James murmured, as he carried Lily closer to the stallion, his medical instruments showing readings he had never seen before. "Her heart rate is stabilizing. Her stress hormones are dropping in real time. I've never witnessed anything like this in 30 years of pediatric medicine." Sarah approached the stallion, who was trembling with excitement but maintaining perfect control of his movements and emotions. His intelligence was evident in every careful step, every controlled breath, as he recognized the precious nature of this reunion. "Hello, beautiful boy," Sarah said softly, her own voice thick with emotion. "Your baby came back to see you." The stallion stretched his powerful neck toward Lily, his nostrils flaring as he caught her familiar scent. When the baby reached out and touched his soft muzzle with her tiny hand, the magnificent horse closed his eyes and made the gentlest sound Sarah had ever heard from any animal, a deep rumbling purr of pure contentment and love. For the next hour, they maintained this extraordinary tableau that seemed to transcend every boundary science had previously recognized. Lily laughed and babbled while the stallion made soft answering sounds, carrying on a conversation in a language that existed beyond words. Dr. James monitored the baby's vital signs continuously and found them to be the strongest and most stable they had been since the rescue. "She's not just happy," Dr. James reported to the assembled medical team and officials. "She's thriving. Her stress hormones have dropped to normal levels, her heart rate is perfect, and her appetite has improved dramatically just from being near him." This isn't just emotional comfort, this is measurable medical improvement. As the afternoon wore on, Sarah realized they were witnessing something that would fundamentally redefine scientific understanding of interspecies bonding and emotional connections. This wasn't just a heartwarming rescue story anymore. It was documented evidence of a relationship that transcended every boundary that medical science had previously recognized between different species. But as the sun began to set over Red Rock Canyon, casting long shadows across the desert landscape, everyone present knew that this magical reunion would have to end. Lily needed to return to human medical care, and the stallion belonged in his natural environment. The question that haunted everyone was whether either of them could survive another separation. What happened next would prove that some bonds are simply too strong for even the best intentions and most carefully considered medical protocols to break. As Dr. James prepared to take Lily back to the helicopter for the return journey to Las Vegas Children's Hospital, the stallion's distress became painfully obvious to everyone present. The great horse began pacing restlessly within his recovery area, calling out to the baby with increasingly urgent and heartbroken sounds that echoed off the canyon walls like a lament. Each step sent visible waves of pain through his still healing shoulder, but his emotional anguish clearly outweighed any physical discomfort. Lily responded to the stallion's distress by crying for the first time since the reunion had begun, her tiny arms reaching desperately toward her protector with the kind of raw need that transcended language and spoke directly to the heart. The sound of her cries seemed to pierce the stallion like physical wounds, causing him to call back to her with even greater urgency. "This separation is causing severe psychological trauma to both of them, Doctor," James said quietly to Sarah, his medical training warring with his human compassion as he watched the heartbreaking scene unfold. "We cannot continue to put them through this kind of emotional torture. We need to find another solution, or we risk permanent psychological damage to both patients." Sarah looked at the stallion, whose dark eyes held an intelligence and depth of emotion that seemed almost human in its complexity and pain. "What if we don't separate them?" she asked, the words carrying the weight of a decision that could change everything. "What if we find a way to keep them together?" "Sarah, that's medically impossible," Deputy Santos interjected, moving closer to the group as she observed the crisis unfolding. "We cannot leave a 6-month-old infant in the wilderness with a wild horse, regardless of how gentle he's been. The liability alone would be astronomical. And we cannot transport a wild stallion into an urban medical environment, Doctor," James added, though his voice carried less conviction than his words suggested. "Even if he's shown remarkable gentleness with Lily, he's still fundamentally an untamed animal with unpredictable instincts." But Sarah was already forming a plan that was as audacious as it was necessary, born from the desperation of watching two souls who had found each other face forced separation that was destroying them both. Over the next several hours, she made a series of phone calls that would change multiple lives forever and create legal precedents that had never existed before in American law. She contacted the Bureau of Land Management, explaining the unprecedented situation and requesting emergency authorization for an experimental therapeutic animal program. She called the Nevada State Wildlife Department, seeking permission to establish a specialized care facility. She reached out to several influential donors who had been following Lily and the stallion's story in the media, requesting funding for an unprecedented project. The response was immediate and overwhelming. Within hours, politicians, medical professionals, animal welfare experts, and private citizens were mobilizing to create something that had never existed before, a bridge between the wild and civilized worlds that would allow this extraordinary family to remain together. By morning, an unprecedented arrangement had been approved through emergency legislative action. The state would designate a section of Red Rock Canyon as a special therapeutic wildlife preserve, with Sarah's Nevada Wild Heart Rescue taking permanent custody of the stallion under an experimental animal-assisted therapy program. A modest but fully equipped medical facility would be constructed nearby where Lily could receive regular medical supervision while maintaining her vital connection to her protector. But the most remarkable part of the plan involved Amanda Thompson, Lily's 19-year-old mother. After weeks in court-mandated rehabilitation and intensive counseling, Amanda had made extraordinary progress in confronting her past mistakes and building the foundation for a stable future. She had completed her substance abuse treatment program, found steady employment, and demonstrated genuine commitment to becoming the mother Lily deserved. "I want to be part of this," Amanda told Sarah during their first face-to-face meeting at the hospital, her young face marked by experiences far beyond her years, but showing a determination that spoke of real growth. "That horse saved my daughter's life when I failed her completely. If Lily needs him to be happy and healthy, then I want to learn how to be part of that relationship." The legal proceedings that followed were complex and unprecedented, involving family court judges, animal welfare attorneys, medical experts, and child psychologists. The case attracted national attention as legal scholars debated whether such an arrangement could ever be considered in the best interest of a child. During this time, both Lily and the stallion continued to deteriorate when separated. Lily's pediatric team documented concerning delays in her cognitive development and serious regression in her eating patterns. The stallion, meanwhile, had stopped eating entirely and showed signs of severe depression that worried veterinary experts about his long-term survival. The breakthrough came when Dr. Rebecca Martinez, a renowned child psychologist specializing in trauma recovery, testified before the family court about the documented benefits of animal-assisted therapy for children who had experienced severe trauma. She presented research showing that children who formed strong bonds with therapy animals often showed accelerated healing from psychological wounds. What we're witnessing here transcends traditional therapy animal relationships, Dr. Martinez explained to the packed courtroom. This stallion didn't just rescue Lily from physical danger, he became her primary attachment figure during a critical period of early development. Attempting to sever that bond could cause irreparable psychological damage. The judge's decision was historic. Lily would be placed in Amanda's custody with the requirement that they live at the newly established Red Rock Canyon Therapeutic Preserve, where both mother and child would receive ongoing support and supervision while maintaining Lily's essential connection to the stallion. 6 months after the rescue that had captivated the nation, Red Rock Canyon had been transformed into something unique in the world. A comfortable but modest cabin had been constructed overlooking the canyon, where Amanda and Lily lived as official caretakers of the preserve. The stallion, whom Lily had somehow learned to call Phoenix in her baby babble, had his own spacious enclosure connected to thousands of acres of protected wild land. But Phoenix rarely wandered far from the cabin, preferring to stay close to the little girl who had become the center of his world. His daily routine now included morning visits to the cabin's porch, where Lily would crawl out to greet him with delighted squeals, and he would gently nuzzle her tiny hands. Sarah visited regularly to monitor both Lily's development and Phoenix's health, and what she consistently found amazed not only her, but the growing community of researchers who came to study this unprecedented relationship. Lily was reaching developmental milestones ahead of schedule, showing remarkable emotional intelligence and an intuitive understanding of animal behavior that seemed to emerge directly from her early bonding experience with Phoenix. "She's teaching me as much as I'm teaching her," Amanda confided to Sarah during one of her visits, watching through the window as Lily played in a secure area while Phoenix grazed nearby, never moving more than a few feet from his beloved charge. "Yesterday she was fussing, and nothing I did could calm her down." Phoenix came to the fence and made this soft, nickering sound, and she immediately stopped crying and crawled over to him. "It's like they have their own private language that I'm still learning to understand." The transformation in Amanda herself was equally remarkable. The frightened, confused teenager who had made a devastating mistake had evolved into a confident young mother who had found her purpose in caring for both her daughter and the horse who had saved them all. She had enrolled in online veterinary technology courses and was working toward becoming a certified animal therapy specialist. But perhaps most importantly, she had learned to forgive herself for the mistake that had nearly cost her daughter's life, understanding that Phoenix's love for Lily was teaching her what unconditional devotion truly meant. 2 years after the rescue that had changed their lives forever, the Red Rock Canyon Therapeutic Preserve had become a beacon of hope and healing that attracted visitors from around the world. On a crisp October morning that mirrored the day of Lily's rescue, Sarah stood at the cabin's window watching a scene that never failed to fill her heart with wonder and gratitude. Lily Rose Thompson, now a healthy and vibrant 2-year-old, was playing in the secure yard while Phoenix grazed contentedly nearby. The little girl had grown into a remarkable child whose development consistently amazed the team of specialists who monitored her progress. Her vocabulary was advanced for her age, her emotional intelligence was extraordinary, and her intuitive connection with animals bordered on the miraculous. Phoenix had aged gracefully into his role as guardian and companion. His mahogany coat gleamed with health, the white star on his forehead seeming to shine brighter with contentment. The scars from his shoulder wound had faded to thin white lines that served as the only visible reminder of the day that had brought them all together. His movements around Lily were always careful and deliberate, demonstrating an awareness of his size and strength that spoke to his remarkable intelligence. "Papa Phoenix," Lily called out in her clear, sweet voice as she toddled toward the fence, her small hands gripping the rails with confidence born of 2 years of daily interaction. Phoenix immediately lifted his great head and walked over to her, lowering his muzzle so she could stroke his soft nose with the fearless affection that had characterized their relationship from the beginning. Amanda emerged from the cabin carrying a basket of carrots, her transformation from frightened teenager to confident young woman complete and inspiring. At 21, she had earned her certification as an animal therapy specialist and had become the preserve's most knowledgeable advocate for the healing power of human-animal bonds. Her relationship with her daughter was built on a foundation of gratitude, responsibility, and the daily example of unconditional love that Phoenix demonstrated. "Good morning, beautiful boy," Amanda said to Phoenix, offering him a carrot while keeping one protective eye on Lily, who was now attempting to feed the great horse handfuls of grass through the fence. Thank you for another peaceful night of watching over us." The preserve had grown far beyond its original purpose of housing one extraordinary family. Under Sarah's direction, it had become a research center for animal-assisted therapy and a treatment facility for children who had experienced severe trauma. Phoenix had proven to be not only Lily's devoted protector, but also a gentle teacher for other children who came to the preserve seeking healing. Walter Jenkins, now 84 years old, made his daily pilgrimage to the preserve with the dedication of someone who had found renewed purpose in his golden years. The Vietnam veteran had become Phoenix's most faithful human friend and Lily's adopted grandfather, spending hours telling stories of old Nevada and teaching the little girl about the values of loyalty, courage, and compassion that Phoenix embodied so perfectly. "That horse has taught me more about love and sacrifice than 60 years of living ever did," Walter often told visitors who came to hear Lily and Phoenix's story. "He showed us that family isn't about blood or species, it's about who you choose to protect and who chooses to stay." Margaret Thompson, Jake's mother, had become the preserve's unofficial historian and grandmother figure. At 80, she spent her days documenting the daily life of the preserve and sharing the story of Phoenix's rescue with the steady stream of families who came seeking hope for their own healing journeys. Dr. James Mitchell continued to monitor Lily's medical development, visiting monthly to document what had become one of the most thoroughly studied cases of trauma recovery in pediatric literature. His reports consistently showed not only normal development, but accelerated growth in areas of emotional regulation, empathy, and social intelligence. Lily's case has rewritten our understanding of how children process and recover from early trauma. Dr. Mitchell explained to a gathering of international pediatric specialists who had come to study the preserve's methods. Her exposure to Phoenix's consistent, unconditional protection during a critical developmental period appears to have created neural pathways that enhance her capacity for trust, emotional stability, and interspecies communication. Sarah had published groundbreaking research based on her observations at the preserve, establishing new protocols for animal-assisted therapy that were being implemented at treatment centers around the world. But her greatest satisfaction came from the quiet moments when she watched Lily and Phoenix together, seeing in their daily interactions proof that love truly could transcend every boundary that science had once considered absolute. The preserve had also become a destination for other rescued horses and children in need of healing. Phoenix, despite his special devotion to Lily, had shown remarkable gentleness with other young visitors, seeming to understand instinctively that his role extended beyond protecting one child to offering comfort to any who needed it. On Lily's second birthday, the preserve hosted a celebration that brought together all the people whose lives had been touched by the miracle of her rescue. As the sun set over Red Rock Canyon, painting the sky in shades of pink and gold that perfectly complemented Phoenix's mahogany coat, Sarah reflected on the journey that had brought them all to this moment. Lily sat securely on Phoenix's back, held safely by Amanda, while the great horse stood perfectly still, his eyes soft with contentment. The image captured everything that the preserve represented: the triumph of love over fear, the healing power of unlikely families, and the proof that sometimes the most broken things, when brought together, could create something beautiful and whole. "Some stories are too beautiful to be true," Sarah said softly, as she watched the family that defied every conventional definition. "But sometimes, if we're very lucky, we get to live inside one of those stories and discover that the most impossible love is often the most real." Dear friends, Phoenix and Lily's story reminds us that life's most precious gifts often come when we least expect them, wrapped in forms we might never have imagined. Like Phoenix, who found his greatest purpose in protecting a child who wasn't his own, many of us discover in our later years that our most meaningful contributions come not from what we've accomplished, but from whom we choose to love and protect. This magnificent horse teaches us that age and experience don't diminish our capacity for profound love, they deepen it. Just as Walter Jenkins found renewed purpose at 84 watching over this unlikely family, we too can find new meaning in unexpected places. Phoenix didn't just save Lily. He reminded an entire community that family is created through devotion, not DNA. In a world that often makes us feel invisible or forgotten, this story proves that our wisdom, our protective instincts, and our capacity for unconditional love are exactly what the next generation needs most. Sometimes the most broken among us, whether horse or human, become the greatest healers when we open our hearts to love without limits. Have you ever found unexpected purpose later in life that surprised you? What moment made you realize that your experience and wisdom were exactly what someone else needed? Please share your stories in the comments below.